Excellent. So my name is Manisha. I am the founder of Obliquity, and we've got a couple of our other team members on the call as well, Kaylin and Kanika, and Jess may also be joining. We are very excited to welcome everyone to our seventh season of Obliquity workshops, Disrupting Systems. This season, we're bringing together artists, healthcare practitioners, students, scholars, and community members to explore how systems shape our experience of care. Through conversations, storytelling, creative practice, and critical reflection, this series asks what happens when we challenge the structures we have inherited? What might more equitable, relational, and responsive systems of care look like? So I would like to start off by paying respect to the land upon we would have the privilege to work, learn, and play. Obliquity respectfully acknowledges that we are located, our home base is in Edmonton, so Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, and Inuit peoples. Our program is influenced by the need to address issues such as racism, intercultural competency, trauma-informed care, and human rights early in medical training. And our sessions and initiatives are designed to serve as calls to action for self-directed learning and relearning. We are so excited to kick off this series with the incredible Sue Robbins. We were delighted that Sue could join us, and we continue to be so impressed by her advocacy for inclusive spaces and teaching around how healthcare providers can effectively engage with patients and their caregivers. Sue is a Vancouver-based author, speaker, and healthcare advocate. Her lived experience includes caregiving as her youngest son has Down syndrome. She has gained the patient perspective with a breast cancer diagnosis in 2017. And Sue's first book, Bird's Eye View, is about the patient experience. Her Ducks in the Row book is about reimagining healthcare through compassion, storytelling, and partnering with patients. She has held family leadership positions with the BC Children's Hospital, Stollery Children's Hospital, and is a member of the Canadian Medical Association for Patients' Voice. In her day job, she is a senior partner with Bird Comm, a creative health communications company. So I'll hand it over to Sue to take things away.
Thanks, Manisha. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here. This is my favorite topic to talk about storytelling. It's interesting. Just a small story about me. I started out in nursing. I was in healthcare, and I spent 2 years in nursing in the BSCM program at U of A before. And this is a long story, but I won't get into it. I transferred into English. So I ended up with a Shakespeare and an art history degree. So the work that Obliquity is doing is like really interesting to me because it's basically like my life. It's a mashup of healthcare and the arts, which I've been doing my whole career. So I'm very excited to talk about the power of storytelling today. We have an hour together. I'll kind of tell you what I'm hoping to speak about. I'll talk about the importance of speaking up, but I'll also talk about the emotional toll it takes to be an advocate, and I'll share some of my own stories about that. And then I want to give some practical advice about crafting a story. I call it my English degree in 3 minutes is like storytelling 101 about how to craft a story for meaningful change. So that was my plan for today. And just make sure I can run okay, there we go. All right, my slide went nice. So this is my why, and I always start with why, no matter what I'm doing. And I think about if somebody said to me, Sue, why do you speak up in healthcare for change? And I'll talk about the different levels you can speak up as far as advocacy. And it really comes back to this guy here. He's like, this is a funny picture because he's out with his mother, but there we are at Granville Island, very Vancouver type picture. That's my son, Aaron. He is 23 years old now, and he has Down syndrome. And my why really is because systems are not built for people like Aaron and people with intellectual disabilities in particular. And that's been my experience as his caregiver mom. And really, if someone had asked my why I, go to school meetings, why I stand at a podium, talk about ableism, like why do I do the work that I do? I would have said early on that I wanted to make a difference. That was usually kind of what people typically say. They want to make a difference in healthcare. And then when I was writing my books, I had to go a little bit deeper than that to think about my why. And I would say my why really is about the root that the reason I speak up is when Aaron was born and he was diagnosed with Down syndrome. I have to say his birth was treated very much like a tragedy. And so a lot of families who get a Down syndrome diagnosis in the delivery room or they call it the suspicion, even the words aren't value neutral, right? There's a chance your baby might have Down syndrome when you're in the delivery room. It feels like the joy gets taken out of that delivery room, like immediately. And our children, our babies are treated as a tragedy. So what I realized, this wound that I was trying to fix in my advocacy, was I really wanted people to think about saying congratulations instead of I'm sorry when a baby with a disability, whatever, something different going on is born. And so that really is my anchor whenever I do my work. And I think about congratulations, not I'm sorry, and really about celebrating strengths and thinking about differences and our own personal bias about disability. So that's really where I come from in my why. And as I go through our session today, I invite you to think about your own why beyond I want to make a difference and really what you would be speaking about in healthcare settings. So that's very, very important. Um, Okay, so I want to pause here and we're going to use the chat. So anytime you see this magic wand there, that means we're pausing for a chat and I'll have a question and I'll do my best to monitor the chat. Maybe Kaylin can help me a little bit because I don't want to miss anybody. But if you, as far as an introduction, if you could write your name, where you're from, if you'd like to do a land acknowledgement too, that's great. And I wanted to talk about, because as we're talking about stories, what is your favorite healthcare story out there in the media? So that could be, as you could tell, I have a picture of The Pit, which is TV. Atul Gawande is doing a TED Talk there. Of course, he wrote a book called Being Mortal. There's a something called Sick Boy, which is a podcast here in Canada, on the east coast of Canada, that is run by a patient and his two friends. So that's a very patient-focused one. And then, of course, When Breath Becomes Air, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, is very classic book about the healthcare experience from a physician point of view. So yeah, your name, where you hail from, and also what is your favorite healthcare story? I always get to pick up lots of good examples from everybody. So I'll give a couple minutes for everyone to type. There's some other ones. Rana Awdish has done some great books as well, has written books. Of course, Oliver Sacks, he's kind of a classic as far as writing about healthcare. Brian Goldman on CBC has a podcast called White Coat, Black Art. First Do No Harm movie. Okay, I'm just going to, as you start. Oh, Between Two Kingdoms is awesome. I'm worried she's quite sick again. I noticed her husband had canceled his rehearsals, but she's a wonderful writer. Yeah, I agree, Salika. Um, yes, the isolation journal she does too. It's funny, my daughter is an RN, I was just mentioning before, at the Stollery, and she will not watch The Pit. She has either people love it or they will just not watch it. She just doesn't have any interest in watching it. She says, too much like work, I can't do it, she said. Um, oh, The Good Doctor. I think that was shot here in Vancouver, that series, The Good Doctor, was shot here in Vancouver. Folks from Edmonton. Oh, I have heard about New Amsterdam. That's a TV show, isn't it? Yeah. Boy in the Bubble. Yeah. See, there is actually quite a bit, isn't there? Grand Prairie. Oh, Story of Harrietta Lacks. I've read that story too. That's a very good book. Wow, this is so great. Are we saving the chat at all, Manisha? Do you know? Is that something we can do?
I can absolutely save the chat
Okay, maybe we could save it as resources, which is kind of fun for folks to have. Yeah, if they're
for
looking
sure.
for, yeah, okay, good. Okay, I'll just give another minute or so. So there's like TV shows, there's movies. There's a great movie called The Big Sick. Have you heard of that? I think it's on streaming now because it was from a few years ago. That's a wonderful movie. Lots of TED Talks. I have to say about disability, there's some really great TED Talks. There's one from Stella Young, who is a disability advocate in Australia. She passed away a few years ago, but she has a talk. It's very provocative about inspiration porn, she calls it. It's very directly about that, about how sometimes we use stories of disabled people for kind of this inspiration reason. It's not really authentic stories. That Stella Young one's really good. And there are tons of podcasts, of course, out. That's really the hot one. Or I heard they're called vodcast or vodcast now because most of them are video as well. So, and of course, books. So, all right, that's great. And so I asked this question because really stories are how I use to advocate. It's how we speak. Call them narratives if you want. Someone told me once, don't call them stories. It makes them sound too soft. Well, I consider them stories. Maybe it's because I'm an English grad, but narratives are how we speak up about personal experiences. Typically, especially folks like me who are patients and caregivers or community members, we don't talk in the terms of research or data. We talk in terms of stories. And certainly, if you have your own professional experiences at work, you typically will talk in terms of stories as well. So I'm going to really focus on stories today. And I believe that stories can disrupt systems. And I think actually that's the only thing that really actually ever has. So this is a great gaping void. Little illustration. It says nothing changes until someone feels something. I also like to say touch hearts, change minds. In the work that I do, I have to believe that that is true. Sometimes, when you're standing in front of an audience and you kind of say, well, I hope one person takes something away and it makes a difference to them. But actually, I think we should think a little bit bigger than that. That probably it would be good if like more than one person thought that way, because change is extremely slow, particularly in the healthcare setting. I have to say it's like a big cruise ship trying to turn around as opposed to a jet ski. Somebody used that metaphor before. It's extremely slow, and I'll talk a little bit about system change later too, and my own frustrations with it and how I managed to survive after all these years speaking up, despite the fact I don't see change very often. But so really, stories, like that's why we go watch TV and we go to movies and we read books, is because we want good stories either surprise us, so it teaches us something new, or we see ourselves validated in the story, which I think is why The Pit resonates with so many folks who work in healthcare, because they have brought on lots of really good consultants onto the show, and most people say it is very, very realistic. So the ability to see yourself in a story is a really powerful thing. I don't think it's a talk until I give an Audre Lorde quote, and she wrote a book called The Cancer Journals. And it's funny, when I got cancer in 2017, which is almost 10 years ago now, and I actually don't really like to talk about cancer that much. You'll notice I won't be giving a lot of cancer stories here. I talk mostly about caregiving. But I read all the cancer books. Like I read The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a really good book to try to understand the science behind it, even though I'm not a scientific person, but I needed to understand the why of cancer. So stories are really helpful, I think, for patients in particular. And there's lots of cancer memoirs out there. So I did probably read all of them. But Audre Lorde, hers are interesting because she also talks about speaking up, because she herself was an activist before she got cancer. This opens the beginning of my first book. So she says, when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak. And I just love that. And it's kind of a piece of my why as well. So Audre Lorde, that's very much a good one. Has anyone read the cancer journals? And if you did, put it in the chat if you thought about them. Okay, hang on. I'm trying to find my advance here. Oh, there it is down here. Okay. So she talked a bit about fear, and I'm going to talk about that today too. So she talked about being afraid whether you spoke or not. And typically in an environment when you feel as if you have to speak up, there is discomfort involved with it. So I like this little quote too. It says advocacy means acting despite discomfort. And a lot of people say bravery is you're doing the thing you're scared of anyways, and that's actually bravery. So if you are speaking up, there's going to be discomfort, but that's also the same definition of as courage. So I wanted to read a little bit from an essay that I wrote about advocacy, and it's called The Reluctant Advocate. And what I said is, here's the reality of being the mom of a disabled child. You have to advocate for essential medical care. You have to advocate for your child to have an education. You have to advocate for basic human rights. You have to advocate for your child to be shown respect and dignity. You have to advocate for your child to access services. You have to advocate for funding. And I was raised to be what I call a good girl, well-behaved, pleasant, to stop feeling sorry for myself. This is in the 70s, very typical way, I think, especially to raise girls. Never to be angry, don't rock the boat, and basically to shut up and sit down. But advocacy demands the opposite qualities, and it requires really an anti-establishment punk rock mentality where outrage fuels a call for justice in systems that are built to marginalize human beings. So really, this is the call to action. That nothing is going to change unless that we speak up. And I won't get into the problems of the healthcare system now. I know everybody is more than familiar with them. But really, again, thinking about your why you would speak up. And I'm going to talk a little bit about punk rock now. All right. This is my punk rock slide. Andrea Gibson was a spoken word poet. She died last year. There's a beautiful documentary about her life and the life care having cancer called Come See Me in the Good Light that I would really recommend. It's beautiful. But she says, I loved what she said about the hard feelings that she encountered towards the end of her life with cancer. She said she decided everything that she was feeling, she was going to name it love. So even if it was anger, she was going to name it love. Even if it was rage, even if it was fear, it all came from a place of love. So what does love have to do with punk rock? You'll have to bear with me here a little bit because I'm going to put them all together. This is also a picture of my son who's actually in Calgary. Manisha, maybe you can go see him tonight. He's playing a show, but he lives in LA, and he's actually a drummer in a quite well-known punk band. If you're into punk, this very specific genre called grindcore, which is like super heavy duty punk. So, but one thing about Isaac, like he took a very creative path in life, which is not an easy path for many reasons, but he loves being a drummer. And ever since he was little, he was that kid who had his cutlery or his chopsticks, and he was drumming on the dining room table, like constantly. He was constantly drumming. His legs were constantly moving. It was just who he was. You couldn't stop him from drumming. And certainly I didn't want to. But really, I think in nowadays, in our, I'll try not to get too political, but in our capitalistic society, really, it is punk rock to love and to show love and compassion for others in community. And it's punk rock to believe in art. And also it is punk rock to believe generally in community. So those are really contrary terms in the world of AI and capitalism and efficiency and all that other kind of stuff that seems to drive our society. I also think of Aaron being quite punk rock all the time. The fact that he's here on this earth and he's different and he owns having Down syndrome and he's proud of it. I think that's very punk rock too. So it is very punk rock to be brave enough to speak up and tell your stories. And it's anti-establishment to rabble-rouse for change. Because of course you're rabble-rousing against the people who benefit from the establishment. That's who you end up rabble-rousing against. So advocacy really, just to sum up my metaphor about punk rock and drummers, is about beating on the same drum over and over and over again. And I certainly have been saying the same things for about 23 years. And yes, it does get tiring. And yes, you need breaks, but that's really what it's all about. So any of you speaking up in any environment, you are punk rock. Just don't forget that, please. Okay, so this is absolutely not an easy path. And many times when I speak up, I'm afraid. Like I was nervous before this talk. I still get nervous. It doesn't matter how many talks I've done. There is an element of that. So I was wondering if you feel, like you said, this is not mandatory, but I was going to pause for a couple minutes. And if you think about speaking up, whether it's in your workplace or if you're a patient or caregiver at point of care, or if you're maybe speaking up at social media or speaking up to the media. There's all these different levels that I'll talk about. But what would be your greatest fear about speaking up? Okay, yeah, not being listened to. Yes, that's the recurring one for me. That's why I get so excited when someone gives me a microphone. I'm like, finally, somebody's going to listen to me. Stigma, yes, losing access to groups, being misunderstood, being discriminated, yeah, totally. Being punished. I know a lot of patients in particular are afraid of speaking up and giving feedback because they worry it might affect their care. Um, Being judged, yes. I know I have written about being a difficult mom. I've been called a difficult mom. And I always like to think not so much I'm a difficult mom, but it's a mom dealing with a difficult situation. I kind of try to reframe it that way. Yes, mustering up the courage to speak up in the first place. That's right. And like I said, I don't talk about my cancer experience a lot. So it's important to know what you do feel comfortable enough speaking up about and what is too hard at, is too difficult for you. Misinterpreted, yeah. Being laughed at, yeah. That people, if you get close to the truth, this is what I believe. People start the more you get to the truth, people start minimizing and dismissing you because of that, because you're getting closer and closer to the truth. I find so it's actually a good sign, but it's very difficult, particularly if you're doing it alone. And I'd like to talk a little bit about community and making sure that you have allies, whether they're with you kind of on the front lines of speaking out or they're supporting you in the background, is really, really important. Well, that's a good one about getting a tone. So yeah, that's about the approach about how you share stories. And I will talk about that a little bit. So, and still being direct and open. One thing I am is very apologetic. And I don't know if that's Canadian or what it is gender wise with me, but I notice I work with quite a few people in Australia and they are very much less apologetic. They're very direct in the way that they speak. And so sometimes I wonder if that's kind of a cultural thing. I'm taking a narrative medicine course actually from a woman who works for Plaintree down in the States. And she says before we speak up to share our stories, she says no apologizing beforehand and no caveats. You're not allowed to give this big explanation before you speak up, which I thought was kind of cool. Like if you think about not apologizing first. Yes, the energy it takes, definitely, Heather. I have been involved with a couple campaigns I'll talk about, but that's certainly not something I could do full time because it takes all your energy. If you're in something that's involves the media and and is very political and stuff, it would be impossible to keep maintain your energy that way. So, okay, all right. Hopeless, yes, I will. I do feel hopeless sometimes, especially since 2020. I feel like the traction, especially with including the patient voice in the healthcare system, slid back a lot since the pandemic. I felt like the leaders got very authoritarian and it was very top down because they had to clamp down because of everything that was going down in with the pandemic, but they never went back. Like they never went back to partnership and inviting people to rooms and stuff. It's very much still authoritarianism. So when I talk about healthcare change, what I really meant was improvement, for things to get better, not things to get worse. And so when I see things have gotten worse, it is actually quite disheartening. And I do feel hopeless sometimes too, which is why I need my allies and my colleagues to keep me going. Okay, I'm going to read, I'm talking about stories. So I thought I would give an example of a story that I use all the time. When I do any kind of teaching about what's important to me, it's both about being respectful of people who have intellectual disabilities, and it's about compassion and how you treat other people. And so as I read it, it's called About Dr. Darwish, and it's from my first book, which is called Bird's Eye View. It was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal a few years ago. And I actually had a chance to read it. I was at a workshop with a bunch of CEOs and I had a chance to read it, and I actually couldn't at the end. I started crying, and this is really interesting because I've read it so many times usually, and I've rehearsed it that I don't usually kind of break down. But I realized that a lot of the times when we speak up, emotions do come into play. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it reminded me how uncomfortable people are with emotions. People were like running over to me with Kleenexes and stuff after. But anyways, it's a very tender story. So I see, I'm doing the caveat. I didn't apologize for it, but do you see how I do that? So I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to be direct and read it. I'd like you, as your job is to think about there are 15 instances of kindnesses in this story. So that'll be the question afterwards in the chat is if you can identify the instances of kindnesses in this particular story. And I use this for teaching about good in healthcare. So that's also interesting to me. I think it's not always about sharing our bad stories. It's also about sharing our good ones for best practice. So that's enough of that about Dr. Darwish. I'll turn to cry, and if I do, I'll be okay. How about that? So I'll just take a big, deep breath. So Dr. Azza Darwish had a very busy pediatric practice. I first called her office when Erin was 3 weeks old. The receptionist immediately booked us into a spot at noon the next day. When my husband arrived at the clinic, I realized they were actually closed for lunch. I was grateful to sit in the quiet waiting room and not be surrounded by seemingly typical babies. That would have been difficult in the fragile early days of Erin's diagnosis. I was living under a heavy black veil of grief, where everything was very dark. I did not wish to have happy, gurgling babies obstructing my view. We were escorted back to Dr. Darwish's treatment room. Mike carried Erin, who was asleep in his car seat bucket. The clinic room was full of photos of Dr. Darwish's patients. Kids with facial differences, kids in wheelchairs, typical looking kids, and yes, I recognized the heart-shaped faces of children with Down syndrome. The display was a beautiful celebration of all the diverse children in her practice. We perched anxiously in our chairs, not talking. I picked nervously at my fingers and Mike stared at the ceiling. Soon after, Dr. Darwish knocked on the door, came in, and introduced herself. The very first thing she did was she scooped slumbering Erin up out of his car seat and held him in her arms. Today, I can still close my eyes and recall this well-dressed physician cuddling my son. It was a powerful image. You have a beautiful baby boy, she said, and a lovely smile spread across her face. In the weeks after Erin's diagnosis, we had visited many health professionals. Not one of them held Erin. Not one of them commented on how beautiful he was. And he was indeed beautiful. Wee, soft, a little bit floppy, with a mess of dark punk rock hair. Dr. Darwish was the first clinician to see Erin as a baby first. She didn't immediately zero in on what was wrong with him. She saw and expressed what was right. She continued chatting with us. It must have been quite a shock for you to find out about the Down syndrome. This opened the door for us to talk about how we felt about Erin's diagnosis. Again, not one other clinician had asked us how we were emotionally. They all talked about risks, statistics, and data. Nobody focused on what was invisible to the eye. Our appointment was close to an hour long. I knew that was almost unheard of in the world of specialists. Dr. Darwish asked us if we wanted to see some of Erin's physical markers. We did. She gently pointed them out. He carefully opened Erin's hands as if to read his palm. She softly showed us his lower set ears and the gap between his toes. She murmured to him as she completed her examination. He was not a lab specimen to her. She treated him with such dignity as if he was her own child. Many years later, my eyes still well up recalling this kindness. Dr. Darwish patiently explained all the services available to us and suggested we get in touch with our local support group so we could meet other families. She said her office would look after all the medical referrals we needed for an echocardiogram and an ECG, for audiology and ophthalmology. She made an overwhelmingly difficult experience more manageable and ultimately more human. When we left her clinic, the waiting room was starting to fill up with patients for their 1 o'clock appointments. When we passed by Dr. Darwish's office, I could see her sitting at her desk, unwrapping her bagged lunch. She had spent her entire lunch hour with us, and we were a family she didn't even know. Dr. Azza Darwish passed away from cancer when my son was 2 years old. She was 52 years old at the time. She's sorely missed in our community because of her skill as a clinician, as she had many children with Down syndrome in her practice. but she's mostly missed because of her compassion as a human being. She was a beloved pediatrician. I cannot overstate the importance for health professionals to give patients and families the gifts of compassion and hope. After that appointment with Dr. Darwish, my heavy black veil of grief began to lift ever so slightly. From beneath that veil, I caught my first real glimpse of my little boy. He continues to shine his light brightly on us today. Thank you, Asa, for that gift. Oh, I did it without crying. That's pretty good, right? If you were live, I probably would be crying. Um, so Dr. Darwish is an example of me using a story for advocacy. And I've told it, I can't even tell you, I've told it in Tasmania at Grand Rounds. I've told it all over the world. Basically, I was at a pediatric specialist conference in San Francisco. I told it then. And I've told it to pharmacists. I've told to other health professionals, not only physicians, because there's so many pieces of that story that any professional can really pick up on. But really, I think what's important, somebody had talked about hope, is that Dr. Darwish and what happened with her in that clinic room really describes the world that I want to see in healthcare. So I think that you can use stories for positive. I think you can use these good stories that aren't too sentimental or syrupy. I mean, just telling about the good things that happen to show best practice in healthcare and how you want healthcare to be. And if I think about Obama's first election, and I actually had a chance to go and I go door to door for him in when he first got elected in 2007. And I have to say, his slogans of belief and hope, that was such a powerful thing for people to be able to believe that there was going to be something better. And so I really believe in describing the world that you want to see. And that is a big part of the advocacy work, is doing that. And you can use stories to do that. So if you want to, if you can think about some of the kindnesses, and I'll probably just keep going as you're writing them, but really some of them were process based. So it was how her clinic was run. And when we called for that first appointment, I'm sure I had said my baby just had a diagnosis of Down syndrome. So the MOA staff knew that it was a brand new family coming in. And for that reason, they booked us at lunchtime. They held those appointments for lunchtime appointments so that we wouldn't be in the waiting room with other families. It also gave us an hour appointment. And I know anybody who's in medicine is going to go like, oh, there's no way that can happen. And, you know, this was also 23 years ago. I understand there's even more pressure to see more and more patients, but really thinking of what a gift that was for her to give us that time with her, and the fact that she did dedicate her lunch hour to us. But I have to tell you, she did put us at a place of strength. And I think I don't know, I think that it has everything, that interaction has to do with how our family functions, and even how Erin's doing today, is that she didn't devastate us by the way that she spoke to us. And I know many, many families who've been devastated by a Down syndrome diagnosis. So it was a real gift that she gave to us. So any of the kindnesses you can think of, she scooped him up and held him. That was really powerful to see her holding him. What she said about him, about what was right about him, not just what could be wrong, which we had heard. We went to a genetics clinic, and I don't want to slam geneticists, but we had a terrible appointment where he was treated very much like a scientific specimen. So really thinking about some of the beautiful things that she did, the explanation she gave to us, all that kind of stuff. Oh, letting you set the agenda. Yeah, she didn't, it wasn't like a checklist at all. Even opening with our feelings, which we talked about for like maybe 10 seconds. It was just like, it felt like a valve a little bit to be able to mention it, but it didn't turn into a 3-hour therapy appointment, which I think some people are worried about if you bring up the idea of feelings. Yes, she asked permission about the physical markers as opposed to just going into a physical exam. And certainly the way she spoke to Erin as she was doing the exam was very tender. So that really helped a lot. Yeah, all the babies in her practice, I had one doctor say, oh, we're not allowed to do that because of privacy issues to have the pictures. And I'm like, okay, like I'm not going to get into all that. And I do understand that. She was her own private clinic. She could put whatever she wanted to on the wall. But I mean, you think about art that was done perhaps by, I don't know, disabled people. Like there's lots of different ways to to indicate in your treatment rooms, like the humanity of healthcare, I think, and sometimes that is missing. Okay. Oh, Heather's got a whole bunch of photos with scooped him up. Yes, that was the long appointment. Yeah, talking to him. So many little pieces. So again, an example how a story can be used for advocacy, but for good to show best practice. Yeah, all the referrals were taken care of. That took a lot off our plate for sure. So it's funny, I did do this talk. I gave this talk in Tasmania, and long story how I got there. But anyways, my first book was released, and I remember I could see there was somebody in the back of the room was really agitated by Dr. Darwish, and I thought, oh no, because I've seen this before. Anyways, he put his hand up right away, and he stood up right after, and he said, "We don't have time to do all this." That's what he said to me, and I've had that comment many times. So I think when you're advocating, kind of like being aware of what the barriers are to people listening to you. Somebody had said about not being listened to, but being aware of that. And there's a book called Compassionomics that I often bring. And if I'm talking about compassion in healthcare, and it's a lit search of all the different studies about compassion in healthcare. And one of the studies says it only actually takes 37 seconds to help a patient or caregiver feel heard in a healthcare interaction. So it does not necessarily have to take more time. It's about how you do things, and really you make the time to do it. You don't take the time to do it. So I think a good little hint is really thinking about who you're talking to and what their barriers to listening might be, and having something in your back pocket to be able to temper that a little bit. Okay, this is as researchy as I'm going to get. I'm going to watch my time. Okay, 30. Okay, so this is like I did this. This is my experience in advocating, is like these various levels. And the one at the bottom doesn't mean it's the least important. It actually means it's the foundation for all the other ones. I have to say that's what the triangle means. So um, I was thinking when Aaron was first born. So we really had to advocate and speak up and educate friends and family. There were a lot of people that had all these weird ideas about what Down syndrome was. So really that was like the first level of advocacy, is that really explaining to people what Down syndrome was and what it wasn't. That was and you know, if you think about your work, not everyone understands your work. So really educating people, that was the first level. The second one is what I call at point of care. Some people might call it at bedside in healthcare, but I like to just say at point of care. And that would be, say, if I was a patient in the hospital and I had to speak up for my needs, or I was involved with shared decision making and I had to share what was important to me, those types of things. If you're in a workplace, as opposed to a patient, thinking about speaking up at a workplace. The next for patients would be like some sort of patient relation process, complaints process. If we don't get kind of what we need at point of care, we kind of pop into the patient relation piece. So there is a definite internal process that has to do with that. Or for healthcare professionals, might have to do with your union or your college, that type of thing. So you could go on that level. Next is organizational. And that one that's when engagement staff or patient engagement happens. So maybe you sit on a committee or a board, or you have some sort of formally, like this obliquity is an example to me of advocacy, because you're advocating for humanity in healthcare, right? Like that's what you're advocating. You've organized together to do that. So that's another way you can do advocacy efforts. The next one is media, but there's not like a lot of mainstream media left, I feel like. So I'd say that most of that comes out through social media. And I certainly know a lot of physicians and nurses who are very active about educating and speaking up with their social media accounts. So there's that physician in Toronto, Andrew, what's his name? Jocelyn would know. And he speaks up a lot about housing and how housing is healthcare. He does a lot of work that way. Dr. Rita McCracken, who I just met, is a family doctor here in Vancouver. And she speaks up a lot about being a family doctor on social media. She does these little videos where she's walking. So media is another way. And then the final way is like political, legal action. It's kind of the most extreme way. I have been involved with both of those. They tried to close down our Down syndrome clinic at the Children's Hospital. And we worked with Friends of Medicare. A bunch of families worked with Friends of Medicare, and we had CBC coverage. And we went to the media, and Friends of Medicare helped us get a question in the legislature about the closing of our clinic. And that was a very powerful moment because the health minister was asked, why are you closing the Down syndrome clinic for 200 families in Edmonton? And they ended up reversing the decision because of that. But we had to work with another organization in order to, there were a bunch of us families, we were quite organized. Man, we were fueled by outrage. I can tell you that. That is like a very powerful fuel. But we had to work with Friends of Medicare to understand how to get into the political system. Yes, thanks, Jocelyn. That is the physician I was talking about. Yeah. We also, during COVID, when people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were not put on the priority list in 2021 for the COVID vaccine, we did also have a campaign about that called Ready for My Shot. And we did put in a human rights complaint with that. So we did go the legal action until we realized that it's very, very expensive to put in a human rights campaign unless you have somebody sponsoring you in some way, because you have to get your own lawyer to temper all the government lawyers and stuff. So we ended up dropping our complaint. But we have had a bit of experience. When I say we, it's my husband and I and the families we kind of like to organize. So that's that campaign. So those are, to me, the different levels of advocacy. So I just pause here. So I was interested in knowing about this group and what level of speaking up have you been involved with? Like, has it been kind of at the workplace, or has it been on social media, or what are the different levels? Maybe you've had a complaint that's been escalated. I've never had a complaint that's been escalated really well, like it hasn't ended to my satisfaction. So that one is kind of a tricky one. And certainly I could give a whole talk about patient relations, but all those different ways. Which ways have you, hang on, I'll go backwards a little bit, experienced any kind of advocacy or speaking up? There's like many of them. And you certainly tell different stories depending on what level you're at. Social media, family and friends. Yeah. Yeah. It's good to practice our stories, I think, with family and friends. Organizational, yeah, joining a committee or council or something is a good way to go. In fact, I'm not sure what this includes, but when the nurses went on their job action here in BC last month, my husband and I and our dog went down to the job action at Surrey Memorial. And I don't know if you can see the sign. We have a sign that says dogs love nurses. So anyways, Abby, who's our yellow lab, put on her sign. And so what we did, I consider this advocacy, we just showed up. We just showed up at the job action line, and people were so pleased we were there. I realized how few patients, and I have one that says patients love nurses. That's the one we had. And so I realized that that is showing up to direct action. That is advocacy too. So, and I put a picture up on social media about it. And it was interesting. You talk about being judged for it. I also had somebody in a meeting I was in say, what about when you take, they were talking about me going to the job action and talking about it publicly. And they said, well, if you take advocacy too far, you won't be invited to the table anymore. That's what he told me. And I was like, well, we didn't like burn anything down or vandalize anything. I think showing up to a job action for him, that was taking advocacy too far. So I guess it shows me there's different comfort levels as far as advocacy is concerned, but I would suggest maybe pushing yourself a little bit more and out of your comfort zone is probably the way we're going to get change in healthcare. So, okay, here we go. Yes, at which of these would you consider participating in protests? Yeah, I've done petitions. We've done petitions with our writing letters. We have done that. I think when things get a little more organized, that tends to be typically if you're doing government advocacy, having a petition, writing letters, talking about it on social media, it's more of a campaign level advocacy, and you get back into the media and the political level. So as I said, I haven't done that a lot of times. I've signed a lot of petitions, but it takes a lot of energy for sure to organize a campaign. For sure, showing up at gatherings, yeah, related to human rights and telling that story. Like I was asking people on LinkedIn, how are you supporting the nurses in the job action here in BC? Nobody answered. So I could tell people were afraid to speak up, which is a real shame. Okay. Oh, a little bit about Ready for My Shot. So this is the campaign, just to let you know, this is more formal campaign. those people pictured were very involved with the campaign. There's a saying in the disability world, nothing about us without us. And so I can tell you this, our graphic designer did this. I own a comms company. So he did this for us. And that's my son, you can see on the left. And Aaron picked the way he wanted the photo to look, and he wanted it to look like the Fast and the Furious. So if you've ever seen the photo from Fast and Furious, oh, I see a dog there. Is that a dog or a cat? That's so great.
Yeah, sorry, she loves attentions.
No, don't be sorry at all. Mine's 75 pounds. Otherwise, she'd probably be on my lap too. So, anyhow, we did a campaign to advocate the government for the government to put people with intellectual disability on the priority list for the COVID vaccine when it first came out in 2021. We had people self-submit stories. So we did that. And we had a video about it where we had some of these folks were actors in the video. We paid everybody, like we made sure that it was done properly. We actually had a chance, CBC came over to our house. It was really in the pandemic. So they were out on our balcony with their cameras, and it was a town hall session. And Aaron spoke up and asked the Minister of Health about why he couldn't get the COVID vaccine. And he actually said, and Aaron, communication is one of his strong points, I have to say, but he said on his own, he said to the health minister, do you care about disabled people or not? He said, that's what he said very, very clearly. And so that coming from him as opposed to a caregiver, I think was a very, very powerful thing. And I got to say, the health minister had a hard time answering that question because it was so direct, but I'm not saying I can draw a direct line, but soon after, people with Down syndrome and other intellectual developmental disabilities got put on the priority list for the COVID vaccine. So whether it was the pressure that we gave to them, it's hard to shame politicians nowadays, if I can say that. It's very difficult. It used to be a little bit easier, and there seems to be a bit of a shameless thing. I think that came from the States. But anyhow, I don't think, at least we knew that we tried and we could sleep at night. Whether we were successful or it was just going to happen anyways, I'm not really sure. And also it gave these folks who had Down syndrome a lot of agency, and not just Down syndrome, we had people with other kinds of intellectual disabilities who are pictured here. I think it gave them agency to be a part of something bigger than themselves, especially during COVID, which was a time where they had so much taken away from them. So I think even the process to build this campaign was very, very powerful, even if there wasn't a direct action according to the outcome. So that's ready for my shot. Okay. I'm going to pause for a bit. I'm like sweating. It's hot here. Is it hot where you guys are? So does anyone, what questions does anyone have? I've been talking a lot. I appreciate all your chats because it shows that I'm on the, Manisha, am I on the right place? Like, does anyone want to, I know usually you go through the chat because there's lots of people, but Manisha, yes, I saw you went
Yes.
off. Yes.
No, I was going to say this has been great. I think we're totally on track. I have no concerns.
Okay. I'll just I'll do a wrap up. We have about 10 minutes. So basically, this is my English degree and my communication company in 3 points. Not to minimize my degree in any way, but I have to say, if you're crafting a story, you're speaking up for change, and you're sharing a story that is related to what you're looking for in healthcare change. So for instance, I am often looking for compassion in healthcare and more humanity in healthcare. And so I have a story that's in one of my books. It's called All the Warm Blankets. And it's about when I was getting my breast biopsy in order to get diagnosed. It was supposed to only take an hour and it took 4 hours. And it was kind of this nightmare. My poor husband was out in the waiting room knowing it was taking 4 hours when it should have been 1 hour. So he knew there was something wrong. And it was just like, I can't even describe it, how stressful it was. And I mean, lots of people here are health professionals. They put you in a mammogram machine, and it's all different angles and it's very uncomfortable. And anyways, at one point I was in this weird angle and my hair had fallen into my face. And I remember the mammogram tech paused what she was doing, and she came over and she kind of wiped my hair out of my eyes. That's what she did. Like, it was so, God, talk about crying. Like, it was so tender, that particular moment. And so I share that story when I talk about the simple things in healthcare that make a big difference. So really thinking about how you would craft a story kind of to back up your point. And I call that little story I just told about the mammogram tech, it's like an anecdote. So it's a little piece of a bigger story. I didn't talk about my whole breast cancer thing. I just talked about that little piece to demonstrate how important uh, the idea of demonstrating kindness is to me, and what a difference that made to me when the mammogram tech did that. So the first thing when you're talking, if I think about even in my doctor's office, really, if I'm speaking up to my doctor and I'm trying to get my point across, really understanding her point of view is really, really important. And in communications, that's the number one thing, is not making any assumptions, understanding your audience. When I speak about compassion, I know there's going to be someone in the crowd. I've had pharmacists say this to me too. We don't have time for that. We don't have time for kindness. So I have some research in my pocket that I bring out and say, actually kindness doesn't take, there's a study that says that much more time. So really understanding your audience is important. And I used to work at the Stollery Children's Hospital, coaching families to share their stories at grand rounds and nursing orientation. They share stories all over the hospital, which is really wonderful thing. But many of those families have very, very big stories, particularly if they've had kids who are medically complex. I work with quite a few families whose children had died, and they wanted to come back to teach about bereavement and palliative care to clinicians. So thinking about, you have a very, very big story, but what are the three key messages you want to say at that point in time is really important so that you don't overwhelm people. And I notice when people first start thinking about their story, I suggest write everything down or sit with somebody and talk about the whole thing is really, really important. But thinking about those three key messages so that people remember what you say, because that's the main thing, is the most important thing. So three key messages. And then also the takeaway action that you want whoever you're speaking up to with your story, you want them to do. So for the campaigns, the instances, okay, like don't close our Down syndrome clinic. That was one of the first ones. That was the kind of the main thing that we focused on. And for the COVID one, it was like prioritize people who have intellectual and developmental disability for the COVID vaccine. So be really clear about the takeaway action. And usually it's pick one. That's what they say for a campaign that you really hammer home. So that piece is really, really important. Oh, Anna said something. Oh, dying for sex. I saw that, but I couldn't finish watching it. If you want the truth, like it's like such a funny, cancer's a funny thing. Like I could read about it, but seeing it on the screen was almost too visceral for me. But that is a good show as well. Very good acting in it. Okay, sorry, I got distracted there. So that's basically my English degree in 3 points. So thinking about what story would you tell if you had an advocacy effort, a reason for speaking up? Do you have a story, an anecdote that kind of goes along to illustrate the change that you want to see? And it can be a negative story. I didn't really want to go into this today, but I have plenty of negative stories in my first book, Bird's Eye View. I have many negative stories that kind of show how I don't want healthcare to be, but it also can be a story that shows how you do want healthcare to be. So think about what story would you share in your own advocacy efforts. Yeah, so I'm watching the time, so I'm going to keep going here, but just some takeaways for you. Oh, okay. I want to talk a little bit about art because it is obliquity. And I know I watched one of your sessions last year and they talked about art, which I think is so cool. So thinking about other ways to share stories. So mostly I'm talking about talking about stories, writing about stories, but you can also use art. Like the first one is a visual art. It's a piece about scars, that people who have scars in healthcare, that somebody created a piece of art that had to do with the scars. The second one is a great photo essay that is of children who have different visible disabilities. The third one is one I did during my cancer treatment. It's not high art in any shape or form, but it was good for me to do it. And it is a picture of the various photos that I took in and outside the hospital. And the picture of the people are actually my family. And so that was very helpful to do that. And then the third one is a poem. And interestingly enough, I couldn't write a lot when I had cancer. I kind of wrote my journal, but it was a bit of a mess. But I ended up taking a poetry course kind of by mistake. And I realized what's great about poetry is it helps you just pick less words. So it's a way to communicate in not as many words. And it was a little bit freeing that way. And so this one I often use when I do presentations to health professionals. It's called Late Fragment by Raymond Carver. And it's or actually when somebody passes away, I often write it in the card as well. But he wrote this poem when he was in late stages of lung cancer. And he said, "And did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To call myself beloved, to feel myself beloved on this earth." And like, I just think about how those words resonate in very, very little words and how beautiful that is. So thinking about there's different ways to share stories. It doesn't just need to be oral or behind the podium or written. And then to end on, it's a Brene Brown. Whenever I talk to patient advocates, I always tell them this, and I want to tell you this too. If you have an interest in advocacy, that means you're standing in your own truth, and that actually makes you a badass. So a total badass. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They will tell you otherwise because they'll try to stamp you down and minimize you because you're a threat to the establishment. But never forget that. I always kind of think when I'm really nervous about when I was in cancer treatment, I was nervous about going in a room. One of my patient friends said to me, "Pretend you're the queen," she said. "Pretend you're the queen." So really thinking of owning your story because it's yours and nobody else's. And that piece is very, very important. And that helps give you some of that bravery that you need to do things despite the fact you might be afraid. Okay, change management, whatever, you can get like a degree about this, but it really does happen one person at a time. And I also have learned over the years that it's generational work. So many families have made the world better. For my son who has Down syndrome in the 60s, they would have tried to institutionalize him, right? The world has changed. And, now he's an actor and he works for the Canucks and he's got like this wonderful life. And really, that's because other families have done that change for us. They might not have ever seen the outcome of the change they advocated for, but it benefited us in the generation behind us. So just to keep that in mind, it is generational work. So a real takeaway is thinking about incorporating stories in your own work, even if you're giving a talk as a health professional, thinking about maybe you could put a little personal story in there about why this is personally important to you. Those types of presentations I know that I always remember beyond the data and the charts that we often do in healthcare. I can share these resources. These are some of the things that I've referred to. There's a beautiful book called The Wounded Storyteller by Arthur Frank that is he's from University of Calgary, who's it's very much about patients sharing stories in healthcare, but these are some good ones. Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I've got it on my arm after I finished my first book, is a book about writing if you're interested in writing your stories. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I know I'm right at time, but Obliquity would really like your feedback. And I would too, because I can always get better. So constructive feedback, positive feedback, whatever kind of feedback. If you folks wouldn't mind taking a moment to scan this. I'm not going to give feedback on my own talk, but I won't do it, but you go ahead and do it. And then I'll pass it over to Manisha for final remarks right at 5:00. Or 6:00 your time, I guess.
Thank you so much, Sue. And yes, just to echo in terms of feedback, this is both about Obliquity in general, but also specifically about Sue's session today. We are a small medical student group, and so often we are running these sessions with very little funds, but we think that they are very important, and hence we have lived on for the last several years. So if you have a couple of seconds, it's quite short. It should take 30 seconds, but to focus back on Sue, thank you so much for your words and your stories. I now, as a pediatrician in Calgary, find these stories so helpful and also helping me reflect on my own practice and how I deliver patient care. And hearing these perspectives is so important. So I very much appreciate everything that you shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for coming at the end of the day. I appreciate it.
And if anyone has any other comments as well, we always leave a bit of time for discussion. So please don't hesitate to unmute. I appreciate the comments and thank yous in the chat as well, but happy to hear verbal feedback and or comments as you see fit.
Thank you, Sue. How nice to see you. It's Jocelyn.
Yes, yes, Jocelyn.
Yeah, great to
Some
see
friendly
you.
faces, so wonderful. So yeah,
Yeah, Manisha,
nursing
thank you.
champion. Hmm.
Oh, well, thank you to you and your team. Obliquity is a place I love to stop in, and I haven't been for a while. So, yay. So, thank you.
Thanks for
Well,
coming back, Jocelyn.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think Vikram has raised his hand. Please go ahead if you would like to share something.
Yeah, okay. I was just trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Sue. I'm always love everything you talk about, and I just want to say three words that I think are very important to remember why you care, because all of you are here for a reason of why you want to do what you're doing, and remembering that is very vital as in order to continue what you're doing. So that's all I want to share.
thanks, Vikram. Okay, so full transparency, Vikram and I are involved with uh, a movement called Stay Human. So if you go on Instagram and you go Stay Human 26, I couldn't get to Stay Human because it was taken, but Stay Human 26, we have an Instagram account where we talk about humanity and healthcare. That's something that the two of us talk about. Vikram's a very strong patient advocate who lives close to me in Surrey. So we've got this side project that we're working on. So thank you for that, Vikram. Yeah, that why is really, really important. I always think the system tries to take that away from health professionals, but you hang on to that. That's yours. That's your gift. Do not let them take it away. It's not theirs to take. Oh, there we go. Stay Human 26. Thank you. Yeah. Rainy. Thank you, everybody. And we can all go have dinner if we're on that time zone. Sounds good. I hope my husband's making dinner. He's supposed to be. Oh,
Yes.
Chris.
Oh,
Oh, good.
yep.
Good to see you, Chris.
Hi. Um, just something that it suddenly crystallized for me just as you were coming to the end, because you mentioned about how much better Aaron's life is because
Mm,
other people advocated earlier. Um,
hmm
and I think one of the things, one of my whys is um, because I feel because I've benefited from the things that people achieved before I came
mm.
along, I have
Right,
a duty to hold that ground and to
right,
try and move it forward. And I think that really only crystallizes when you recognize how much has already been achieved. And then it becomes a responsibility that you carry forward to hold that ground, to not let those rights be lost, so that you're not actually forcing the next generation to do more when you could have
right.
actually held it for them.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's very well said. And I can say in the disability world, that is a very strong sentiment that is why we do the work we do, because we know that people have done it before us and that our children's lives have changed because of it. The one thing is like share the responsibility because it can be quite heavy. Like if you feel like that's your responsibility to make change, like sharing it and passing the baton as much as possible is really important, I think, for our own mental health, because it is a heavy, it never ends. Like it just never ends. So taking breaks is important too. But thank you, Chris. And Chris is a writer and he's a patient advocate in on Vancouver Island. So I'm so pleased to see like some of my people are here. And yes, thank you for this. Thank you for inviting me.
It was our pleasure. And I really think that you set the stage for what we were hoping for this season. So
Great.
the pleasure is all ours. Thank you so much, Sue.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody.